If you followed my content for a while, especially on Instagram, you'd know that I keep talking about the two U's. There's the monkey brain, the inner part of our brain that evolved many eons ago. And then there's the more modern part of the brain. And we learn more about this in the next episode. But in this episode, let's talk about the two U's. Okay, so the two U's. How do people learn how to drive? See, learning to drive is a very complex process. Some of you haven't learned to drive yet. Some of you have. But after a few years of practice, people can drive without any conscious attention. A lot of people don't even pay attention to the road when they're driving, and they can still navigate fairly efficiently. So first you go out on the road, in your car, you make some mistakes paying full attention. After a while, driving becomes automatic and you can think about what's for dinner while your hands and legs work automatically to make sure you get home safe. It's like your body is moving on its own. The last time, especially if you drive, you don't remember the last time you took a left turn or a right turn. It just happens. You just know what to do. So you can have a conversation with another person while driving. It's just like typing on the keyboard, right? Today, I don't need to think about where the letters are. I just know intuitively how they, where I should place my fingers and in which order. So when you start driving, it's a rational process. When you first start learning how to drive, it's a rational process. You pay attention. But it eventually becomes an intuitive process after you gain experience. Intuitive meaning it happens automatically. Your body does it. The same is true from everything from business to swimming to relationships. Mistakes or bad patterns that you picked up while driving are maintained throughout life. So if you have some repetitive behavior that's poor that you learned while learning, it's very hard to unlearn that, especially after it becomes intuitive. So that's why when you're learning something, learn it the right way, because unlearning bad habits, that's a difficult thing to do. So let's talk about System 1 and System 2. So the winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, Daniel Kahneman, wrote a very big book called Thinking Fast and Slow. If you guys get the ability to go get your hands on the book, do it. It's a fantastic read and it's fairly long, but I'll try to summarize it. Your behavior is determined by two systems in your mind. System 1 and System 2. System 1 is automatic, right? It's the one that drives after you've learned how to drive. System 2 is conscious and requires effort to use, right? So your brain defaults to System 1 to conserve energy. So in the case of driving, it starts out as a System 2 process, which is engaged during learning and eventually becomes a System 1 process. Rationally thinking out every situation, which means what step am I going to do next, is a big waste of time, which is why System 1 is useful. Think about this, right? Think about me in this room right now. Suppose I wanted to go out and eat something for breakfast. What I'd have to do if I was completely running on System 2 all the time is first I'd have to decide which leg to move, how to shift my balance, how to get off the chair, should I put my left leg forward or should I put my right leg forward? How many steps should I take? When should I take a left? So there are many decisions even before I decide what food to eat, right? And it's a big waste of time and we wouldn't be able to do anything if we computed everything. So System 2 is a rational computer, but System 1 is automatic, right? It tends to fall back on patterns that you've already kind of used before, that you're comfortable with. So System 1 helps you conserve energy and more importantly, it helps you conserve time. What would take you 10 hours to figure out just to go to, eat something, System 1 allows you to do in a few minutes, right? So System 1 is useful and rationally thinking out every situation is a big waste of time. So let's go back to System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast. It's unconscious. You don't have any control over it. It's automatic, right? Even our speech is based on System 1. We can keep talking. I'm not thinking of every word that comes out, right? It just comes out because I have practice saying these words. It's used for everyday decisions and it's very error prone. System 1 makes a lot of mistakes. System 1 is your gut. It makes a lot of mistakes. Even though people say, trust your gut, that doesn't really work out too well in practice. System 2, on the other hand, is slow. It's conscious. You have to put effort. It allows you to make complex decisions and it's reliable. It's usually more reliable than System 1. We have to learn that there are two distinct parts of the brain inside you. And the brain tends to use the irrational, which is a System 1, and irrational means that it doesn't usually make sense. It's just common patterns that we used in the past in similar looking situations. But as we know, the world is complex. There are many different types of situations. So we can't just bucket all situations to be similar situations. The brain tends to use the irrational part because it takes less effort. Many people wrongly apply system 1 to things that they have zero training or experience in. You might think, oh, I'm really great at this one thing, so maybe I'll also be great in that other thing which is not related to this thing, right? But has similar patterns. So if you're good at one game, you might think, hey, I might be also good at another game. But the truth is, if you put yourself in as many games as possible, then you might be good in the next game because you've been through many different types of patterns. System 1 dominant people are very prone to biases, right? They're biased very often because that's what they've trained their body to do. If you're a zombie, essentially, if you're on system 1 all the time. And if you're on system 2 all the time, then you're too slow. So you need to find the right balance between system 1 and system 2, right? You need speed, and the only way to get speed is to use system 2 a lot and then shift that to system 1. So if I want to learn how to, say, do design, what I do is I rationally figure out, okay, I need to press this button, I need to, change hue and saturation like this, practice that a few times until it becomes automatic. The next time I need to change color or hue, I know exactly which key combination to press, and that's because that's now in system 1. So you exercise a concept in system 2 until you're able to use it through system 1 in a much faster form. So reflection, which is the ability to look back at something you did in the past, is a system 2 behavior. And it's important to omit training errors in system 1. So if you learn to drive badly, and I'll give you my example, right? When I learned how to drive a car, I used to always hold the clutch, right? I used to always do it. It's just an unconscious thing that I had done during system 2, and it just felt right to always hold the clutch. And it turns out that I was holding the clutch too hard, right? And because of that, the amount I was accelerating was too hard. And it's only when my friend told me that, hey, look, I think you're holding the clutch too hard because the amount of acceleration you're putting in is too much for this car, right? And that's when I realized, for many years, I was driving a car in a slightly wrong way. So I had to unlearn that behavior, and it turned out to be much harder than I thought it would be. What started happening was that I'd put my feet on the pedal, and then I would automatically slip. Whenever I got distracted, I would press the clutch again. So I had to consciously be aware and be like, every time I drive my car, I'm going to make sure I take my foot off the clutch when it's not necessary, right? And then slowly I learned how to do it better. And then finally, I got an automatic car just so that I don't have to deal with this problem, because when you pick up a training error, it's hard to unlearn that, and you need to reflect. You need to be conscious, and you need to be like, I made that mistake again. So we have to try and omit our training errors. And again, that's a system 2 process. It's like uninstalling software on your computer. It's much harder, right? The malware always pops up. So we are constantly fooling ourselves by creating stories of the world and then by believing it. One last thing that I want to add about this interesting book is that we as humans are constantly fooling ourselves by creating narratives of the world and ourselves, and then by believing it, right? And human brains are connected by stories. We're a storytelling machine. We'll learn more about this in the next episode. But I just wanted to give you the idea. So the next concept I want to tell you about is the idea of biases. So having a bias means that if you have two options, you are leaning in one direction, right? You have a clear winner in your head already, and that's biases, right? You're basically biased towards one of two or many things. You're biased to one thing out of many things. You have a favorite, right? So biases are parts or errors of system 1, right? Because system 1 is interested in the idea of biases. We are all biased creatures, right? We don't have a choice about this, right? And it's because of how system 1 works. System 1's job is to make biases. I'll give you an example of a useful bias. People think that biases are bad, but that's not true. There is a useful bias, which is if you're driving and you've learned how to drive and you've learned how to use the brakes, after some time, if you see another car just zooming in front of your car, you will hit the brakes really fast. Even without your conscious, rational brain being activated, system 1 knows it has to put its leg on the brake, right? That's a bias. It's an instinctive bias. You see something going fast right in front of your car, you will slam the brake. That's a useful bias. If you waited for system 2 to sit and calculate whether that's a good decision or a bad decision, you'd be dead, right? So you need system 1 to engage fast. And that's what biases are. But I don't want to go through every bias since you're not going to remember when or how to use them. So the most important bias is hindsight bias. Hindsight bias means that once a situation is over, once it's over and it's done, you look back and say, I always knew that was going to happen. I always knew that startup was going to succeed. The founder looked like a smart guy. Or, I met that guy once in coffee day and I knew he was going to do very well, right? And I just knew. The thing is, usually we don't have enough data to make these predictions, but after an event is over, it's very easy to make such predictions, right? It's called hindsight bias, where we think we knew something all along. And my question to those people is usually, if you knew Bitcoin was going to go up, why didn't you put your money there, right? And I remember tweeting about Bitcoin, and this was before. It was not a hindsight bias. It was before the event even happened, when it was about $50 or $70. But I didn't put my money into Bitcoin at that point, right? But the point is that hindsight bias happens after. After it's all done, it'll be like, yeah, I always knew it was going to go up, right? Now, whether you invested or not is not the important bit. What's important is the fact that you always knew it was going to go up is wrong information. That's just your brain being biased. The next thing is the availability heuristic. So the availability heuristic is what keeps replaying in your head again and again. And this is something that the news does a lot. The number of shark attacks in the US, right, in beaches is actually very, very, very small. But the reason people are so scared of shark attacks is because the news constantly talks about it again and again and again. So if the last piece of news you heard was that 12 people died in a plane crash yesterday, because of that, you say, I'm never going to fly in a plane again. That is wrong. Because out of the total number of people that fly a plane every day, that's a small fraction. And that is a very, very infrequent event, right? In fact, planes are still one of the safest ways to travel, right? So the idea that just because something is occupying our headspace, it happens a lot, that is wrong. And it's called the availability heuristic. It means that we think that something is extremely available just because we heard about it many times. So there are a lot of venture capitalists who will invest in startups just because they've heard its name many times and it's occupied mind space. It's also the general idea behind advertising, right? So you make it seem like something is available in much larger quantities than it actually is, that something is everywhere. So that's the idea behind advertising as well, right? You make it seem like something is everywhere and something is a lot more popular than it is. So the last bias on our list, or on our important biases list, is confirmation bias. We look for evidence of things we already believe. And as you can see on the left, that is an image of confirmation bias. So you have some facts, but you don't look at the entire facts. You just look at what you want, right? It's like the people who believe in, say, one team versus another team. Say you really care about an India versus Pakistan match. The Indian cricket team supporters are going to go to Google and look for good things about Indian team, and they're going to ignore the bad things about the Indian team. Whereas the Pakistan team supporters would come in and look for good things about the Pakistan team and ignore the bad things. So the idea is that we tend to pick out what already confirms our beliefs, and that's the confirmation bias. So when you're looking for evidence of something, try to look for unbiased evidence. So one confirmation bias that's always affected my mother is the idea that protein shakes are bad for you, right? So what she would do is she would go to Google and specifically type protein shake bad for kidney. And obviously when you make such a query on Google, and we've learned how to make such queries on Google, she'd find evidence of how protein shakes actually cause kidney issues, right? And she'd send them to me. But I keep telling her that, look, you're only specifically looking for this sort of information. Try to look for objective information. And the difference between objective and subjective, in the objective world, we try to look at both sides of the fence. We try to look at something that is for something and something that's against something. So we try to look for sources of information that are both for the topic as well as against the topic. We look at both sides without making judgment. And that's what confirmation bias is. We make judgment and then we already look for sources that confirm our judgment, right? So my mom would send me that, and then I would send her the opposite. I'd find sources that said, yeah, protein shakes are really good for you, because that's what I was looking for. Protein shakes, no kidney issues. Right? So at the end of the day, the truth is that protein shakes are not related to kidney issues. But the point is that the way I was arguing with my mother about this was not the right way, right? So at the end of the day, I was arguing in a way where I was using confirmation bias, she was using confirmation bias, and it was impossible for each of us to get our point across. Decisions that we make are influenced by our memories, but our memories themselves are wrong and reproduced badly. So even when it comes to our judgment, when it comes to hindsight bias, when it comes to availability heuristic, we look at how we used to think many years ago, right? And we say, okay, I used to think this way 5 years ago. But the truth is, you don't remember how you used to think 5 years ago. It's hard for you to do that. And it's actually, you don't remember what happened in a situation 5 years ago. And if you think you have perfect recall, you are wrong, right? So our decisions that we make on a daily basis are based on our memories of similar decisions in the past, but our memories themselves are wrong and reproduced poorly, right? And that's something we need to be aware of. So how much do we really know about something? So this is the thing that I was talking about in empathy too. There are many variables in a situation, and how much we really know about the situation is just a tiny fraction. In fact, that's over exaggerated. We know much smaller amounts than that, even that. Confidence is a feeling that comes with ease of processing information. So you have a lot of information that's coming into system 2, then you are less confident about it. But if you have a lot of information that's already in system 1, then you are more confident about it, right? I'll give you an example. If this is the first time you're driving and you have to use a lot of rational thought to drive, then you are not that confident about it. But if you've been driving for a long time and your ability to drive is already in system 1, then you become confident about it. It's a matter of practice, because practice transfers skills from system 2 to system 1. The less ambiguity, which is the less uncertainty we feel, the more confident we feel. In reality, this is simply your brain tricking you, as there's no way you could have known all the variables beforehand. Even if you've been driving for 10 years, you can't tell if a car is suddenly going to come in front of you and, that it could happen. It could happen on the 1,000th time you drive. You can't expect what will happen. A tree might fall on you. So there's no way you could know all the variables, but you have a general idea of what the odds of something like that are, because you've driven so much, it's shifted from system 2 to system 1, and you know that the odds of a tree falling on you or a car coming in the way are relatively low. The only way to reduce ambiguity is to put yourself in as many difficult situations as possible. That, not surprisingly, that is also the fastest path to becoming confident. And the short answer to all of this, or the short summary, is that confidence comes from practice and putting yourselves in those situations. I'm very confident of driving on Indian roads, but I'm not so confident if I have to drive at the edge of the Swiss Alps, because I've never driven there before. I'd be sweating. Whereas somebody who drives there every day is confident about it, because that person, he or she knows what the amount of force to put on the steering wheel when a turn is happening, because that person has gone from doing it via system 2 to system 1, right? And that's what confidence is about. It's about practice in those particular situations, which is why in tennis, you have some players who are really good on clay courts and you have some players who are really good on grass courts, right? It's about the amount of practice that they have there, which is also directly proportional to the amount of confidence they have there. So I just had to add this in here. This is my big problem with the media. All the variables in the situation, how much a person really knows about this situation is a small amount, but the media makes it seem like they know a lot about the situation. But the truth is that they don't, right? No one knows unless they're people who are very close to a situation or an event, right? So how much the media knows about the situation is always over exaggerated, and which is why when you're looking at news online, be very careful when somebody makes detailed claims about somebody else's life without being in their life all the time. So one last question that I want to answer before we kind of call this a day is there free will? Do we make our decisions or are they pre-made? In studies of free will, the brain seems to make decisions before we are aware we made the decision. It seems like if you have to choose between two blocks, a red block and a green block, the brain will already choose a block and then it will trick you into believing that you made the choice. So you can look at the graph on the left, and I'm just going to quickly explain it to you. The intention to act, which is the intention to choose the green block, was already made in your brain even before you said or you told yourself that, yeah, I'm going to choose the green block. So it seems like the brain is just acting in stimulus to its environment. And obviously it's a complex processing engine. It's not a direct, it's a red block and I like red, so I'm going to pick it. It's very complex. It could be situational. But the point is the brain has already made a decision and then it has tricked the person into believing that he or she made that decision, which is wrong, right? So as you can see, the intention to act happens before the action performance, right? Even before the person says, I'm going to pick the red block, in the brain, a trigger pops up saying red block, right? The brain is just acting. And we've seen this in a primitive creature, a worm known as the C. elegans, right? It's a creature with a primitive nervous system, but the response is purely driven by stimulus, right? So there's a video of this and we'll watch it right after this. Actually, we'll watch it right now. See if we can watch this video. Right? So as you can see, the worm is touched and it acts according to stimulus and it goes backward, right? So it was going forward and then it was touched. Stimulus moves backwards. So humans function the same way, although with many more variables, more inputs and more outputs involved. So it just seems like we're much more complex worms. It seems like the body and the mind have already made a decision depending on your past and how you've behaved in the past, your genes and your environment. And you're just tricked into believing that you made the decision. In the next episode, we are going to learn how all of this adds up and how the brain is truly a social brain. Catch you on the next one.